Off the coast of Greenland, at the northern edge of the Atlantic Ocean, a region that appears almost empty on most maps is quietly becoming a place that decides who truly controls the gateway to the Western world. Under the cold, gray skies of the Arctic, a United States Navy reconnaissance aircraft flies at a steady altitude. It keeps its distance, avoids any show of force, yet continuously tracks a dangerous target hidden deep beneath the surface. Below the thick, dark waves, a Russian nuclear-powered submarine moves silently along a maritime route that NATO considers a red line. The vessel does not need to surface and does not transmit any signal because its mere presence already carries strategic weight. If it succeeds in passing through this area, the entire Atlantic Ocean would lie open before Moscow. For several minutes, everything unfolds exactly according to the American plan. The aircraft holds position, the sensors operate normally, and the target below remains under control. But the Arctic rarely follows human scripts. A sudden high-altitude wind stream forms, stronger than forecasts predicted, and strikes the aircraft directly. The cockpit shakes, the flight path shifts slightly, and then, in a brief but deadly moment, the radar system loses its signal. It is the kind of moment every aircrew understands immediately. Not because of the risk of crashing, but because in modern warfare, losing vision for even a few seconds can be enough for an opponent to act. And Russia has been waiting for exactly that moment. From the dense mist in the distance, two Russian fighter jets appear almost simultaneously. They approach rapidly, fly dangerously close, and cut across the nose of the American aircraft at minimal distance. At the same time, powerful electronic jamming floods the airspace. The cockpit fills with white noise and cascading warnings. This is not a weapons attack, but a carefully calculated psychological strike designed to apply pressure without crossing the line into open conflict. From Moscow's perspective, the situation looks ideal. The American aircraft is temporarily blinded, under pressure from above, and if forced to withdraw, the submarine below would gain room to maneuver. Without firing a single shot, Russia could still secure a strategic advantage. Control would be shifted not by force, but by timing. What Russia does not see, however, is the larger picture. That American aircraft is not the entire system. It is only a small part of a much wider network. When the radar goes dark, it does not mean the United States has become blind. It means the rules of the encounter are changing. In that silence, an invisible trap begins to operate, quietly, without spectacle, but with enough precision to turn the one who believed himself to be the hunter into a target more closely monitored than ever before. The GIUK Gap is not a familiar name to the general public, but within American and NATO military thinking, it is one of the most critical routes on the world map. This region lies between Greenland, Iceland, and the British Isles, forming a natural gateway that connects the Arctic to the entire Atlantic Ocean. For decades, any force that controls the GIUK Gap has held the ability to decide who may enter and who may exit the strategic waters of the Western world. Control here translates directly into influence over Atlantic security. What gives this corridor its enduring importance is not just geography, but predictability. Submarines moving south from the Arctic have limited options, and those options funnel naturally into this space. That concentration turns the GIUK Gap into a pressure point. Surveillance does not need to be everywhere, only persistent in the right places. Control is less about blocking movement outright and more about ensuring that movement carries risk from the first mile. The reason is straightforward. If a Russian nuclear-powered submarine passes through this area undetected, it can move deep into the Atlantic, where the security foundations of the United States and its allies are anchored. That capability alone is enough to shift the balance of deterrence. It places constant pressure on maritime routes, military bases, and NATO's broader defense architecture. In strategic terms, This pressure is psychological as much as physical. The knowledge that an unseen submarine may be operating freely forces planners to assume worst-case scenarios. Resources and attention are stretched even in the absence of direct action. That is why a single successful transit without any attack can echo far beyond the waters where it occurs. For this reason, the GIUK Gap is not a place where the United States and NATO can afford slow reactions. It is an area that must be controlled continuously. This control is not asserted through loud confrontations or visible clashes. It is maintained through quiet, persistent surveillance systems operating without pause. The American reconnaissance aircraft in this story is not tasked with attack. Its role is to observe, to record every movement, and to maintain invisible pressure that denies confidence to the adversary. It is a deliberate choice to let awareness itself shape behavior. Deterrence is achieved through knowledge rather than force. Russia understands the significance of this region just as clearly. Sending a nuclear submarine into the GIUK Gap is not a routine transit. It is a strategic test. Moscow seeks to measure NATO's response time, coordination, and resilience under harsh Arctic conditions. These tests are rarely about achieving a permanent breakthrough. They are designed to collect data, identify friction points, and measure confidence. Even a partial success can inform future operations. Each probe becomes a learning exercise rather than a single gamble. To protect this strategic effort, Russia deploys 2 fighter jets to provide aerial cover. They are not sent to fire weapons. Their task is to apply pressure. The objective is to push the American aircraft into a passive position and force it to leave the area. If that happens, a temporary corridor opens for the submarine operating below. Time, not territory, becomes the objective. What Russian planners underestimate, however, is one decisive factor. In this silent contest, the United States does not rely solely on eyes in the sky. In every military plan drawn on a map, the Arctic remains an element that can never be fully controlled. This is a region where weather is not merely a backdrop, but a tactical variable capable of disrupting even the most precise calculations. At the altitude where the American reconnaissance aircraft is operating, environmental conditions change faster than human reaction time. Even a small deviation can be enough to trigger a chain reaction. Stability, timing, and awareness are all placed under constant pressure by forces no side can command. When the high-altitude wind suddenly intensifies, the aircraft begins to feel its effects clearly. Wind shear develops rapidly, forcing the aircrew to continuously adjust altitude and heading to maintain stability. These corrections accumulate second by second. To an outside observer, such adjustments may not appear dramatic, but during a sensitive tracking mission, they increase operational pressure with every passing moment. Precision becomes harder to sustain. At the same time, the aircraft's sensor systems begin to show abnormalities. The radar displays light interference, then the signal grows increasingly unstable. For an experienced aircrew, this pattern is familiar. It is a known characteristic of the Arctic environment, but it is also a warning that conditions are approaching a risk threshold where systems no longer behave predictably. The American crew understands the significance immediately. They are not only flying in difficult weather, but operating in a region where any interruption can be exploited. Environmental stress and strategic exposure overlap. For a few brief seconds, the radar loses its lock on the target. It is not catastrophic and does not last long, yet even a momentary gap is enough to change the equation. In modern warfare, seconds are not a minor detail. They are a window of opportunity, sufficient for one side to shift the balance of initiative if it has been waiting for such an opening. On the other side, these anomalies do not go unnoticed. Russia recognizes quickly that the American tracking system is experiencing a temporary disruption. The exact cause may be unclear. Whether weather-related or technical, the effect is the same. A brief opening has appeared, and it will not remain open for long. For Moscow, this moment is rare. There is no need for reckless escalation, but there is a need for speed. Two Russian fighter jets change course immediately. They accelerate toward the area where the American aircraft is operating. Every maneuver is calculated to exploit the gap before the U.S. system stabilizes again. From the American perspective, a familiar dilemma emerges. Continue the mission under elevated risk, or adjust posture to reduce pressure from both environment and adversary. This decision affects more than aircraft safety. It influences the entire strategic picture unfolding beneath the surface of the sea. Nature, in that moment, does not favor either side, but it disrupts the fragile balance that had existed in the region. And once balance is broken, readiness becomes decisive. In modern warfare, missiles or artillery are not always required. Sometimes, a few seconds created by nature itself become a dangerous weapon when exploited at exactly the right moment. The two Russian fighter jets appear faster than expected, closing in on the American aircraft at a distance close enough to create unmistakable pressure. This is not an attack in the traditional sense, but a display designed to act directly on the psychology of the opposing aircrew. The close distance, high speed, and angles of approach are all carefully chosen. These close-in maneuvers are not random. Every pass across the flight path and every change in altitude is intended to send a clear message. Russia wants the American aircraft to understand that it is being closely monitored. Even a small mistake could lead to serious consequences. This form of pressure requires no gunfire, yet remains highly effective in forcing the opponent to consider withdrawal. It is intimidation executed through proximity rather than weapons. At the same time, electronic jamming is activated at high intensity. The electromagnetic space around the American aircraft quickly becomes saturated with false signals and white noise. Warnings appear in rapid succession, reducing clarity inside the cockpit. The objective is not to destroy the system, but to make it unreliable for a short period of time. Confusion, not damage, is the intended effect. Operational confidence becomes the target. For the American aircrew, this is a familiar situation, but never a comfortable one. They must separate real signals from interference while maintaining aircraft control and spatial awareness. The pressure builds steadily. The risk does not come from being shot down. It comes from the possibility of collision or unintended incidents under conditions of elevated stress. In close air encounters, mistakes do not need weapons to become dangerous. From Moscow's perspective, this tactic serves a specific purpose. If the American aircraft leaves the area, even briefly, the submarine below gains additional freedom to maneuver. Time without surveillance matters. In an environment where silence is the greatest advantage, a few minutes can be enough to change position. Reduced detection risk is the prize Russia is seeking. In Russian eyes, the American aircraft appears temporarily blinded. There's no need to escalate further. Maintaining pressure long enough to force withdrawal is considered sufficient. This approach is familiar in gray zone confrontations. The line between peace and conflict remains deliberately fragile, allowing pressure without open escalation. However, activating electronic interference at such intensity creates another consequence. When Russian systems operate at full power, they leave clear traces in the electromagnetic environment. These signals do not vanish instantly. Those traces provide additional data for NATO's monitoring systems. What is meant to suppress awareness begins to generate new sources of information. At that moment, the psychological balance starts to shift. Russia believes it is forcing the United States into passivity. At the same time, it is revealing its own activity. What appears to be a pressure game focused on one aircraft expands into a broader operational picture. As psychological pressure reaches its peak, a question takes shape. Is the American aircraft truly blinded, or is the excessive display causing Russia to expose far more than it intended. At the moment when pressure reaches its peak, the response of the American aircrew does not unfold in the way Russia expects. Instead of attempting to regain active radar control or transmitting countersignals, they choose a different path, one that is quieter but far more dangerous. The aircraft does not try to see more clearly. It begins to listen. Active radar is reduced in priority, while passive tracking systems are brought to the forefront. This is not a defensive reaction, but a tactical transition prepared in advance. In an environment where the electromagnetic space is saturated with interference, emitting additional signals only increases exposure. At this moment, silence itself becomes an advantage. Rather than transmitting, the aircraft's systems focus on collecting data. Every fluctuation and every minor signal in the surrounding environment is recorded and processed. The flow of information continues without interruption. In the sky, the American aircraft appears to be under pressure. At a deeper operational level, however, the picture remains stable and increasingly detailed. Beneath the surface of the sea, NATO's sensor network is unaffected by what is happening in the air. These sensors are fixed in place, operate continuously, and do not need to activate to reveal themselves. In the cold and dark waters of the North Atlantic, they continue to register every acoustic trace. Even the smallest movements of the submarine below are captured. The acoustic signatures of the Russian submarine do not disappear when airborne radar encounters disruption. Under stable underwater conditions, these characteristics remain clearly present. Familiar sounds generated by mechanical activity and water flow around the hull continue to be recorded. This data is transmitted steadily to analysis systems. The information collected does not exist in isolation. It is compared against an acoustic library built over many years. Each submarine class carries distinct characteristics, much like fingerprints. This comparison process does not occur in a single moment. It continues over time, allowing position and direction to become increasingly precise. As time passes, the accuracy of locating the Russian submarine does not degrade, it improves. Small course adjustments are detected almost immediately. Once the picture beneath the surface of the sea becomes sufficiently clear, the next step does not require any dramatic movement. Target data is transmitted discreetly, through tightly secured channels, to a United States warship operating in the area. This vessel does not appear on the opponent's radar screens, does not transmit signals, and reveals no indication that it is involved in the situation. Maintaining complete electronic silence, the American warship holds its position and remains ready to act if necessary. This silence is not only meant to avoid detection, but also to preserve the element of surprise. At this moment, Russia has no clear indication from the surface that the situation has changed. In the air, Russian fighter jets continue to focus on applying pressure to the American aircraft. From their perspective, the silence from the sea reinforces the belief that the plan is unfolding as intended. There are no reaction signals and no signs of intervention. This absence of response leads them to assume that the United States remains in a passive position. The lack of visible movement becomes part of the psychological environment shaping their decision-making. But this silence does not last indefinitely. Suddenly, a brief radar signal appears from the surface of the sea. It does not last long enough to guide any attack action, but it is strong enough to be clearly recognized. The message carried by the signal requires no explanation. It is simple and direct. Every movement has been tracked for some time. For the Russian pilots, this moment carries a very different meaning compared to previous approaches. The sense of initiative they believed they held begins to waver. A signal from an unexpected direction forces a rapid reassessment. Beneath the water, the Russian submarine faces a similar reality. Signs that the surrounding environment has changed become increasingly apparent. Subtle adjustments in American tracking tactics raise the level of risk. Instead of pushing deeper forward, the submarine begins to alter its course. This decision is not symbolic, but based on a clear safety assessment rather than political intent. The intention to pass through the GIUK Gap is abandoned. Instead, the submarine selects a different route, prioritizing reduced detectability over continued pressure on NATO's surveillance system. In the sky, Russian fighter jets confront their own practical limits. Fuel levels decrease, pressure persists, and the risk of unintended escalation continues to grow. When the initiative is no longer clear, close approaches become unnecessary. The aircraft begin to withdraw, ending the pressure maneuver that had taken place earlier. The confrontation starts to dissolve without any visible clash. Not a single shot is fired throughout the entire event. There is no direct attack and no dramatic imagery suitable for headlines, yet the outcome is unmistakable. The strategic gateway remains in the hands of the United States and NATO. Control is preserved without noise. The trap closes without the sound of an explosion. And in the world of modern warfare, that silence is the clearest sign of who is truly in control of the game. When the chain of events came to an end, what remained was not the image of an air battle or a weapon launch beneath the sea. Everything unfolded far more quietly, yet that silence revealed the true nature of the confrontation more clearly than any explosion could. A U.S. reconnaissance aircraft completed its mission, Russian fighter jets withdrew, and a nuclear submarine turned back. There was no visible material damage and no public declaration of victory, but the strategic order in the region remained intact. Russia did not lose any platforms. The United States did not fire a shot. On the surface, this could be seen as an encounter without results, but when the original objectives of each side are considered, the picture looks very different. Russia sent a submarine into the GIUK Gap to test reactions. The purpose was to see whether the gateway into the Atlantic was still tightly controlled. The outcome of that test became clear. The door did not open, and invisible pressure was present from beginning to end. For the United States and NATO, there was no need for dramatic action to achieve their goal. Control of the GIUK Gap was not demonstrated through explosions, but through forcing the other side to adjust its behavior. When the Russian submarine abandoned its route and the fighter jets pulled back, it became a clear signal. The strategic objective had been preserved without escalation. This reflects an important reality of U.S. military power in the modern era. That power does not lie in moments designed to attract attention, but in the system itself. It is a system capable of linking data, maintaining continuous situational awareness, and applying enough pressure to make an adversary think carefully about every move. Each platform is only one piece, but together they form a picture that is extremely difficult to escape. Modern warfare increasingly requires fewer explosions to produce real outcomes. In many cases, the result is decided before any weapon is used. Control of information, signals, and the ability to know precisely where an opponent is located have become decisive factors. The GIUK Gap in this story is a clear example of that shift. From a broader perspective, this event raises a larger question about the future. As technology advances and systems become more invisible, will these silent weapons become the deciding factor in every confrontation? And if so, how will victory be measured when there is no smoke or fire to mark the moment? When success is defined by restraint rather than destruction. If you have your own perspective on who is truly controlling the game in these quiet confrontations, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to keep exploring military stories that do not appear on maps, confrontations without gunfire that can still change the strategic balance, subscribe to Military Power. Each week, we bring you clear and in-depth analysis to help you understand how the world operates behind layers of silence.